You are on Crazy Karen HOA. The portal history was the smoking gun. I do not need your story, Karen shouted, and she slammed a stack of certified mail slips on the hood of my car. She could lose my paperwork again if I made her mad, she said. And the way she smiled when she said it told me she had done it before. The tow truck was already idling at the curb, driver leaning against the door like he was waiting for a cue. I had been living in Ridgeview Estates Homeowners Association in Seattle, Washington for 6 months, and this was the third time Vanessa Brown had shown up at my door with a new excuse to fine me. This time it was a tow invoice for a vehicle I had parked legally in my own driveway. The invoice was $200, and she said I had 48 hours to pay, or the association would add late fees and start lien paperwork. I asked her what the violation was, and she waved the packet like a weapon and told me I would find out when I read it. I work as a rideshare driver. I depend on my car being available. If they tow it, I lose income, and I cannot keep my kids' routine stable. School pickup is at 3:15 every day, and the HOA kept scheduling enforcement sweeps right around that window. Vanessa knew that. She had mentioned it twice in previous conversations, always with that same tight smile. I opened the packet right there on the hood. The invoice was dated 2 days ago, but I had been home all week and no one had knocked. The violation description said unauthorized commercial vehicle, but my car is a sedan with no markings. I pointed that out, and Vanessa tilted her head and said the rules were clear and I should have read the CC&Rs before I bought here. I told her I did read them, and there was no mention of ride-share vehicles being banned. She said the Design Review Board had updated the policy last month, and if I had attended the meeting I would know that. I asked for a copy of the updated policy, and she said it was on the portal. The portal had been down for 3 weeks. I had tried to log in 6 times, and every time I got an error message. I told Vanessa that, and she shrugged and said technical issues were not her problem. She said if I could not access the portal, I could request a paper copy for a $10 processing fee. And it would take 7 to 10 business days. I asked her how I was supposed to comply with a policy I could not read, and she leaned in close and said, "If you make me repeat myself, it gets more expensive." The tow driver pushed off the truck and walked over. He looked at me and said, "Hey, are you ready?" And he used my first name. I had never met this guy. I asked him how he knew my name, and he glanced at Vanessa and said she had given him the work order. I asked to see the work order, and he pulled a clipboard from the truck. The authorization slip had my name, my address, and my plate number, but the signature at the bottom did not match any HOA officer signature I had seen before. The format was off too. Thicker paper stock, different logo placement. I pointed that out, and Vanessa snatched the clipboard and said the format did not matter because the board had approved it. I asked her which board member signed it, and she said that was confidential. I told her I had a right to know who authorized a tow from my own property, and she said I did not have any rights until I paid my dues and stopped making her job harder. I asked if she was recording this conversation, and she pulled her phone out of her crossbody bag and held it up. She said she recorded everything for liability purposes, and if I had a problem with that, I could file a complaint with the management company. I pulled my own phone out and started recording, and she immediately told me to put it away because recording without consent was illegal. I told her Washington is a 2-party consent state, and she had just admitted she was recording me without asking first. She said that was different, because she was acting in an official capacity. The tow driver stepped back and said he was not getting involved. He told Vanessa he needed a signed authorization that matched the company format, or he could not proceed. Vanessa snapped at him and said she would call his supervisor, and he said go ahead. She pulled up a number on her phone and made the call right there. She told whoever answered that the driver was refusing to do his job and she wanted a replacement sent immediately. She hung up and told me the truck would be back in an hour, and if I moved my car in the meantime she would have me cited for obstruction. I asked her what I was obstructing, and she said the investigation. I asked what investigation, and she said the design review board was conducting a compliance audit and my refusal to cooperate was making it worse. I told her I was happy to cooperate as soon as someone explained what I was being accused of, and she said I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. She said it like she was joking, but her face did not move. The tow driver got back in his truck and drove off. Vanessa watched him go, then turned back to me and said I had just cost the association money and she would make sure that showed up in my next assessment. She said the board meeting was in 2 weeks, and if I wanted to appeal the tow fee I could submit a written request through the portal. I reminded her the portal was down, and she said then I should have planned ahead. She left, and I stood there with the invoice packet in my hand. I went inside and called the management company. The receptionist put me on hold for 10 minutes, then transferred me to a property manager named Angela, who sounded like she had heard this before. I explained the situation, and she sighed, and said Vanessa had submitted 3 tow authorizations that week, and 2 of them had been flagged for review. She said the company was looking into it, but the process took time, and in the meantime I should keep my receipts and document everything. I asked if I could get a copy of the design review board minutes from last month, and she said those were supposed to be posted on the portal but she would email them to me if she could find them. She never did. I started going through my own files. I had moved to Ridgeview Estates in June after a divorce, and the neighborhood had seemed quiet and affordable. The HOA fee was $200 a month, and the rules looked standard. No loud parties, no junk cars. Keep your lawn mowed. I had read the CC&Rs twice before I signed, and there was nothing about rideshare vehicles. I checked the board meeting schedule, and there had been a meeting in September, but the agenda had not mentioned any policy changes. I pulled up the minutes from that meeting, or tried to, but the portal link was dead. I texted my neighbor, a guy named Colin who lived 2 doors down and had been in the neighborhood for 5 years. He was the one who had told me the portal had been broken since August. I asked him if he remembered any policy changes in September, and he said no, but he also said the board did not always announce changes in advance. He said Vanessa had a habit of pushing through amendments during meetings when half the board was absent, and then acting like everyone had agreed. He said he had screenshots of some of her posts in the neighborhood group chat, and he would send them to me. Colin sent me 4 screenshots. In one, Vanessa had posted that anyone using their vehicle for commercial purposes needed to apply for a permit or face fines. In another, she had said the board was cracking down on violations and residents should expect increased enforcement. The timestamps were from late September after the board meeting. I asked Colin if anyone had challenged her, and he said 2 people had, and both of them had gotten violation notices the next week. One was for a mailbox that was supposedly the wrong color, even though it had been there for 3 years. The other was for a trash can left out past pickup time, except the resident had doorbell footage showing the can was brought in on time. Vanessa had insisted the footage was edited, and the fine stood. I started looking into the tow company. The invoice had a logo and a phone number, but when I called it, the number was disconnected. I searched the company name online and found a business registration, but the address was a P.O. box and the last filing was from 2 years ago. I checked the Better Business Bureau, and there were 6 complaints, all from people in HOA neighborhoods, all saying the company had towed vehicles without proper authorization, and then demanded payment before releasing them. I called the tow yard that actually had my neighbor's car once, a legitimate place on the south side. The clerk remembered Vanessa. She said Vanessa had tried to set up a contract with them last year, but they turned her down because the authorization paperwork she provided did not meet city requirements. She said Vanessa had gotten angry and accused them of not understanding HOA law, and the manager had told her to leave. The clerk said Vanessa had sent a complaint letter to the company threatening to report them to the state, but nothing ever came of it. That was when I realized this was not just about me. I started asking around. I found 3 other residents who had been hit with tow threats in the past year, and all of them had paid to make it go away. One guy said his car had been towed in the middle of the night, and when he went to pick it up, the yard would not release it without a $250 fee, even though there was no violation. He paid it because he needed his car for work, and then he found out the HOA had no record of approving the tow. When he asked Vanessa about it, she told him the records had been misplaced, and there was nothing she could do. I started looking at old board minutes, the ones I could still access from before the portal went down. There was a meeting in March, 3 years ago, where a resident had raised concerns about missing money in the HOA budget. The reserve fund was supposed to have $60,000, but the quarterly report showed only $42,000. The resident asked for an audit, and the board president at the time said they would look into it. The next month's minutes did not mention it. The following month's minutes did not mention it. By June, the resident who asked for the audit had moved out. I pulled the budget reports from that year. The line items did not add up. There were entries for vendor payments that had no corresponding invoices, and several entries for towing and compliance enforcement that were double what the HOA had spent in previous years. I cross-referenced the vendors, and 2 of them had the same P.O. box address as the tow company on my invoice. One of them was a compliance consulting firm that had been paid $8,000 over 6 months, but there was no record of what services they provided. I let her talk, because every word was helping me. I was building a file. Every time Vanessa sent a notice, every time she changed the story, every time she threatened me, I documented it. I took screenshots. I saved emails. I recorded conversations where Washington law allowed. I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 places, 1 physical binder and 2 cloud backups. 2 weeks after the first tow attempt, I got a notice in the mail. It was from the Design Review Board, and it said I had failed to respond to a compliance inquiry, and my account was being referred for collections. The notice was dated a week before I received it, and it referenced a form I had never seen. I called the management company again, and Angela said she had no record of any form being sent to me. She said Vanessa had submitted the referral directly to collections without going through the standard review process, and the company was pushing back. She said I should ignore the notice until they sorted it out. I could not ignore it. The collections agency started calling me 3 days later. They said I owed $200 plus a $50 processing fee, and if I did not pay within 10 days, they would report it to the credit bureaus. I told them I disputed the charge, and I wanted documentation. They said the HOA had provided all necessary documentation, and I needed to take it up with them. I asked for a copy of the authorization, and they said they would mail it. It never came. The mail carrier showed up at my door one morning with a certified letter. She needed a signature, and she told me the sender had requested delivery confirmation with a timestamp. I signed, and she handed me the envelope. It was from Vanessa, and inside was a new invoice, this one for $300. The breakdown included the original tow fee, a late fee, an administrative fee, and a records request fee. There was a note at the bottom that said payment was due within 72 hours or the HOA would place a lien on my property. I took a photo of the envelope, the timestamp, and the contents. Then I called an attorney. He listened to the whole story and said it sounded like fraud, and if I could prove Vanessa was running a scheme with a fake tow company, the HOA could be liable. He said I needed to gather more evidence, specifically anything that tied Vanessa directly to the company or showed she was backdating documents. He said if I could get that, we could file a complaint with the State Consumer Protection Office and possibly get the HOA investigated. His retainer was $1,500, and I did not have it. I kept digging. I went back through the neighborhood group chat and found a post from 2 years ago where someone had asked about a towing incident. Vanessa had replied that the board had contracted with a new vendor for better rates, and residents should expect stricter enforcement going forward. I searched for the vendor name, and it was the same P.O. Box company from my invoice. Another resident had replied asking for the contract details, and Vanessa had said the contract was confidential and available only to board members. I filed a records request with the HOA. Washington law says HOA records have to be available to members within 10 business days. I submitted the request through email and asked for copies of all towing contracts, all vendor agreements, and all board meeting minutes from the past 3 years. I got an auto reply saying my request had been received. 3 days later, I got a response from Vanessa saying my request was too broad and I needed to narrow it down. I replied with a list of specific documents, including the contract with the tow company and the minutes from the March meeting where the audit was discussed. She replied that the tow contract was proprietary and the minutes from that meeting were missing. Colin showed up at the mailbox cluster one afternoon and handed me a small envelope. He said he had been going through his own files and found something I needed to see. Inside was a printout of a board meeting agenda from 3 years ago, the same meeting where the audit was mentioned. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note that said records locked per VB request. Colin said he had gotten the printout from the previous HOA secretary, who had quit after Vanessa joined the board. The secretary had told him Vanessa had asked her to remove several items from the meeting minutes before they were posted, and when she refused, Vanessa had gone to the board president and had her removed. I added the note to my file. I now had a timeline. 3 years ago, a resident raised concerns about missing money. Vanessa joined the design review board around the same time. The audit was buried. The resident moved out. The tow company with the P.O. Box address started showing up in the budget reports. Over the next 2 years, multiple residents were hit with questionable tow fees, and anyone who pushed back got more violations. I needed the trump card. I needed something that connected all of it in a way no one could deny. I went back to the tow yard clerk and asked if she still had records of Vanessa's visit. She said she did not keep visitor logs, but her manager might remember. The manager was in, and I explained what I was working on. He pulled up the complaint letter Vanessa had sent. It was on Ridgeview Estates HOA letterhead, and it accused the company of refusing to honor a valid contract. The letter referenced an agreement number that did not exist in their system. The manager said he had replied to the letter asking for a copy of the contract, and Vanessa never responded. If this story is making you as angry as it made me, hit the like button and subscribe, because it gets worse before it gets better. I went to the county clerk's office and pulled business filings for the tow company. The agent of record was listed as V. Brown, same last name as Vanessa. The business had been registered 3 years ago, 2 weeks after the board meeting where the audit was discussed. The address on file was a residential property in Tacoma. I ran the address through the property records database and it came back as a rental owned by an LLC. The LLC manager was listed as Vanessa Brown. That was it. Vanessa had set up a shell company, funneled HOA money into it through fake invoices, and used her position on the board to shut down anyone who asked questions. The tow threats were not about compliance. They were about generating fees she could pocket. I printed everything. I made copies of the business filings, the budget reports, the vendor invoices, the complaint letter, the fake authorization slips, the screenshots from the group chat, the timeline, and the handwritten note from the secretary. I put it all in a 3-ring binder with tabs and a table of contents. I made 3 copies of the binder, one for me, one for my attorney, and one for the meeting. The board meeting was on a Thursday night at 7. I showed up at 6:45 and sat in the back. The room was half full, maybe 20 residents. Vanessa was at the front table with 3 other board members and Angela from the management company. Vanessa saw me walk in, and her face went tight. She leaned over and said something to the board president, and he nodded. The meeting started with routine business, budget approvals and landscaping updates. Then the president opened the floor for resident comments. I stood up and said I wanted to address the towing policy. Vanessa interrupted me before I finished the sentence. She said resident comments were limited to 3 minutes and I needed to submit my topic in advance. I told her I had submitted it by email 2 days ago, and she said she never received it. The president looked uncomfortable and said he would allow it as long as I kept it brief. I walked to the front and set the binder on the table. I opened it to the first tab and said I wanted to talk about the compliance audit that started 3 years ago and never finished. Vanessa said that was not relevant to current business, and the president told her to let me speak. I pulled out the budget report from 3 years ago and pointed to the line items that did not match. I said the HOA had paid $8,000 to a consulting firm with no record of services, and the same firm shared an address with the tow company that had tried to tow my car. Vanessa stood up and said I was making accusations without evidence. I flipped to the next tab and pulled out the business filings. I said the tow company was registered to V. Brown, and the address on file was a property owned by an LLC managed by Vanessa Brown. I slid a copy of the filings across the table to the board president. He picked it up and read it, and his face went pale. Vanessa said the filing was a coincidence, and I was harassing her. I said I had copies of vendor invoices, fake authorization slips, and a timeline showing she had been running this scheme for 3 years. I flipped to another tab and pulled out the handwritten note from the former secretary. I read it out loud, the part that said records locked per VB request. I said Vanessa had buried the audit, forced out the secretary, and blocked every records request that might expose her. The board president asked Vanessa if she wanted to respond. She said I was lying and she had never seen that note before. I said the former secretary was willing to testify, and I had her contact information if the board wanted to follow up. Vanessa said the secretary had been terminated for cause, and her statements were not credible. Angela from the management company cleared her throat and said the company had been reviewing Vanessa's tow authorizations and had found multiple discrepancies. She said the authorizations did not match the standard format, and several of them had been submitted without board approval. Vanessa started yelling. She said the management company was incompetent and they had lost half the records. She said she had been doing her job while everyone else sat around, and if the board did not like it, they could find someone else to do the work. The president told her to sit down, and she refused. She said she was not going to be accused of fraud by someone who could not even follow the rules. She pointed at me and said I had been violating the parking policy since day one, and if the board did not enforce it, she would resign. The president said the board would take her resignation if she wanted to submit it. Vanessa grabbed her crossbody bag and stormed out. On her way past me, she said, "If you make me repeat myself, it gets more expensive." It was the last time she said it, and this time, everyone heard. The board went into a closed session. I waited in the hallway with Colin and a few other residents. Angela came out after 20 minutes and said the board had voted to freeze all enforcement actions pending a full policy review. She said they were also hiring an independent auditor to go through the past 3 years of financial records, and they would be referring the matter to the State Consumer Protection Office. She said I should expect a call from the auditor within the week. I got the call 3 days later. The auditor wanted copies of everything I had, and I sent him the full binder as a PDF. He called me back 2 days after that and said he had found evidence of at least 12 fraudulent vendor payments totaling over $30,000. He said the HOA would be filing a police report, and the state office would be opening an investigation. He said it was one of the clearest cases of embezzlement he had seen in an HOA, and he was surprised it had gone on for so long. Vanessa tried to fight it. She hired an attorney and sent a letter to the board claiming I had defamed her and demanding a retraction. The board ignored it. She posted in the neighborhood group chat saying the investigation was a witch hunt and I had fabricated evidence. Colin posted the screenshots of her old messages, and 3 other residents backed him up. She deleted her account. The State Consumer Protection Office moved fast. Within 2 weeks, they had frozen the tow company's business license and opened a case file. The HOA board called an emergency meeting and voted to terminate Vanessa from the Design Review Board. They also voted to implement a board resolution that suspends towing until authorization rules are fixed. The management company sent a letter to every resident explaining what had happened and offering refunds to anyone who had paid a questionable tow fee in the past 3 years. I got my refund 2 weeks later, $200 deposited directly into my account. 7 other residents got refunds too, some as high as $500. The HOA also reimbursed me for the records request fees and the legal consultation. The board president called me personally to apologize and said they should have caught it sooner. Vanessa did not go quietly. She showed up at a hardware store parking lot one afternoon when I was picking up supplies. She walked up to my car and started yelling that I had ruined her life and she was going to sue me for everything I had. A couple of strangers stopped and stared, and one guy pulled out his phone and started recording. I stayed in my car and let her talk. She said I had no idea what I had done, and the board was going to regret siding with me. I told her I had every conversation recorded, and if she did not leave, I would call the police. She left. The police report went through, and the county prosecutor's office opened a case. Vanessa was charged with theft and fraud. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea, but the evidence was too strong. The trial was set for 6 months out, but it never got that far. 3 weeks before the trial, Vanessa accepted a deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of theft by deception and agreed to pay full restitution to the HOA. The tow company was dissolved, and the state office issued a cease and desist order preventing her from operating any vendor services in HOA communities. She was also forced to retract her claim in writing, and the board posted the retraction in the community newsletter. The HOA hired a new management company and rewrote the enforcement policies from scratch. They added transparency requirements, mandatory audits, and a resident appeals process that did not rely on the portal. They also installed a new board, and Colin ran for a seat. He won. I kept my files. I still have the binder in my office, and I update it every time someone asks me what happened. The story got around, and other HOAs in the area started asking questions about their own vendors. 2 more neighborhoods found similar schemes, both involving fake compliance companies and backdated invoices. The state office started a task force to investigate HOA fraud, and they used my case as the template. The funny thing is, I still live here. The neighborhood is different now, quieter and less tense. People actually talk to each other instead of worrying about who is going to report them. The new board sends out meeting agendas a week in advance, and they post the minutes within 48 hours. The portal works. I saw Vanessa one more time, about a year after everything went down. She was at a gas station near the freeway, and she saw me pumping gas. She got back in her car and left without saying anything. I let her go. She had already lost everything that mattered: her position, her reputation, and her scheme. I did not need to rub it in. The restitution payments started coming in monthly, small amounts that added up over time. The HOA used the money to fund the reserve account and repair the community center roof. They also set up a scholarship fund for residents' kids, and my daughter was one of the first recipients. It felt like the neighborhood was paying itself back, one check at a time. I still drive for rideshare. My car is still parked in my driveway, and no one has tried to tow it since. I pick my kid up from school at 3:15 every day, and we have dinner at the same table where I built the case that brought Vanessa down. She asks me sometimes what happened, and I tell her the short version: someone tried to cheat, I caught them, and the system worked. She says that sounds like a movie, and I tell her real life is better because you can keep the receipts. Thank you, and I will see you next time.